So, as the last guest for this afternoon, I'm pleased to introduce Barbara Brondi, architect, designer, and independent curator. Together with Marco Reno, they founded BRH Plus in 2002, a design practice characterized by a holistic approach derived from the concept of an architectural practice open to the convergence of disciplines. Their experimental approach takes the form of planning practice, theoretical research and critical reflection on architecture, contemporary design, and graphic design. Their architectural projects, for different purposes at different scales and realized all over the world, are presented in numerous Italian and international magazines. Designer of various exhibitions and editorial projects, they curated the talent spotting and didactic training program in residence design and all the events correlated to it. In 2014, the In Residence project was the guest and protagonist of the prestigious Swiss Summer School program at the Swiss Pavilion in the garden of the Venice Architecture Biennale. And as graphic designer and art director, they have worked for Vivienne Westwood, Adidas, Visionaire, Lago, and many others. And they are also responsible for the graphic image and visual communication of the National Museum of Cinema in Turin. I'm now passing the floor to Barbara, who is going to talk about the homeostasis of a non-dual threshold. And thank you again for being with us today.
So it's already difficult to say the title of my lecture. So I'm here because I really want to inspire the students. So I know that this has been a long day, but I will be successful if with my lecture I will inspire you and give a little bit of maybe curiosity about to deepen up a little bit what I'm gonna say. So let me see if I can read it without glasses. Yes. I'm going to start just saying that I'm not going to show any of my work, and what I do is mostly I'm going to show a little bit of my research, what I like to do, mainly self-taught, because I really think that it's important for everybody to continue to be curious in life and learn, even in fields that are maybe not related with what you do in life, but I think it could enrich what you're doing. So I really believe that when you have to learn something in order to find solution, but you have to really learn it, how it functions, because if you don't know how thing functions, then you cannot get to a solution. So since this symposium aims to explore the entanglements between the interior space and the environment and call for vision where the non-human will be central, I really wanted to investigate a little bit more what human and non-human means and how ecology and interior space are related. So if we go back to the term ecology, is the scientific study of the interrelationship between living organisms and their physical environment and between each other. So I want to point out this word, which I thought it was really interesting, interrelationship, that will come up often during this lecture, but it came also often in the lecture, in the previous one. So an example of interrelationship between science and art and how science studies influenced the culture at the beginning of the century, I wanted to bring up a story about Ernst Haeckel. You might know him because he was the first one who coined the term ecology. So I really thought it was interesting to see that this German zoologist, naturalist, and philosopher, but also artist and designer, I must say, he was the one who discovered many, many thousands of new species and coined, for sure, of course, the term of ecology for the first time. So the little story about him that I found it very interesting is that Ernst Haeckel, teacher, one day he said, well, why don't you come with me for a summer expedition to go and study the marine organism along the coast of Helgoland. So after his stay on the island, he produced many multi-detailed and color illustrations of the sea creature he studied, and more than 100 drawings were collected in 1904 in a book called Kunstformen der Natur, Art Form of Nature. And here are just some examples that he did, and I would suggest you to go, now it's very easy to go on the web and look at all the other drawings that he did that I think they are amazing. And all these drawings were, you know, very popular at the time and influenced the artistic development of the Art Nouveau at the beginning of the 20th century. And this is just an example of the role of design in establishing relationship between nature and culture. And when I do my research, I always try to find some links between what I just found and some other topic that I'm interested in. And I found a beautiful link this time, and which is Helgoland. Because this little island, it's a German island, literally Helgoland means sacred land. And this small island where Ernst Haeckel did his studies and research, and after his study he produced all this beautiful drawing, was the same island where, like approximately 20 years later, in the same island, and maybe by coincidence, I didn't find that. But in the summer of 1925, a 23 years old German young man called Werner Heisenberg went to spend few days, not really few, quite a lot of days in solitude. And there he formulated the idea that it would transform the whole science and our very conception of the world, which is the quantum theory. So Werner Heisenberg, he was awarded in 1932 with the Nobel Prize in Physics for the creation of the quantum mechanics, which, as I said, was disruptive. And I like to always bring this reference back that this Italian scientist, Antonio Rovelli, says in his book called Helgoland, again, that the quantum theory clarified the basics of chemistry, the functioning of atoms, solids, plasma, the color of the sky, the neurons of our brain, the dynamics of the stars, the origin of the galaxy, and 1,000 aspects of the world. And this is the basis of the most recent technologies. For example, computers, nuclear power plants, and engineers and astrophysics, cosmologists, chemists, and biologists use it every day. It has never been wrong. It is the beating heart of today's science. So this is the book by Carlo Rovelli, which is really incredible, I must say. And he's a scientist, but also a very good writer. And in his own original theory, the revelation, it's called like the relational interpretation of the quantum mechanics, where the world is fundamentally made of relations and events rather than permanent substances, and reality is made by relations before than objects. So where we as other thing around us exist in our interaction with one and another. So this completely changed our point of view. And Rovelli explains to us that things as they appear to us don't exist. They are no independent objects and definite properties. So because each thing exists only in relation to another, and the properties of each thing appear to us only when it's influenced or is influenced by another one. So we are facing a world that we are living instead where there are things that there are no real things, but there are just interaction between things. And this might seem like a little thing, but it changes completely the point of view. So I'm going to just quote one sentence that really explains very well this concept. So every object is just a set of interaction on other objects, and reality is this web of interaction. Instead of seeing the physical world as a set of objects with definite properties, quantum theory invites us to see the physical world as a network of relationship in which objects are nodes. This means that the property of every object is nothing other than its interaction with another object, and that the evaluation or measure of every object cannot be considered independent of the observer. So the physical property, the heat, the position, the color, the movement, all the properties that we perceive when we experience the world are nothing that belongs to objects themselves, but they are just bridges between, one object and the other. And the interaction is the real subject at this point. So if we look at that from our point of view, from our user-object point of view, what I would like to point out is that the meaning and what we attribute to things is what relates to something else. So it's really the intention that we put in things that matters. So when going back to Helgoland, so when in Helgoland Island, Heisenberg realizes this strange calculation perfectly account for the values of his teacher, Bohr's atomic model. Niels Bohr was his teacher, and he was awarded also with a Nobel Prize in Physics 10 years before, in 1922. So he was excited to see that everything was coming at the right point. And I like to quote this sentence that he wrote in his diary. He said, "I was deeply alarmed. I had the feeling that through the surface of phenomena, I was looking into an interior of strange beauty." And I think at that time, probably was really disrupting, because Albert Einstein thought of nature as a perfectly ordered system of simple and deterministic natural laws, while Niels Bohr and Werner Heisenberg theorized an intrinsically probabilistic nature of physical processes. And this is a complete change of paradigm on reality. And of course, it took a lot of time before this complete change of paradigm came more acceptable and part of our own way of living. But still, it is mysterious and not easy to accept because it's really so disruptive. So Carlo Rovelli tells us a story about the phenomena that change based on the observer. And he says that reality reveals itself to be non-continuous and always changing. He says, physical things only have properties relative to other physical things, and that this property exists only when things interact. So, based on this assumption, we must consider the complexity of the relationships between every element. And here I wanted to point out, the title of my lecture, that we don't have like really sharp border and sharp division between things that we considered eventually the opposite. So like, for example, internal, external, nature, culture, human, inhuman, mind, body, thought, feelings, or right or wrong, speculative and functional, and see that all these distinctions are blurred and the borders are not easy to be defined. All these concepts are variable on historical, geographical, social, religious, cultural level, and they depend upon interrelationships. So, going back to the term ecology, the object of study of ecology is everybody knows, is the ecosystems, right? So if we look at the definition of ecosystem, it says, the set of living organisms and non-living substances with which the exchange of material and energy is established in a delimited area. So each ecosystem has boundaries and membranes, and through which the system interact with each other and tend to remain in this dynamic equilibrium, which I think is the key point. The key point is this dynamic equilibrium. So the mechanism that regulates this state of around equilibrium, dynamic equilibrium from within the system, it's called homeostasis. And I wanted to bring this example related to the scientific field because I believe that there are several similarities between the definition of ecosystem and the concept of interior as a discipline, as a professional practice and a field of research. In fact, the interior is a space delimited by a border, a separation that serves to distinguish what is considered interior to the outside. But as the Canadian philosopher Mark Kingwell states, interior is always defined by at least 3 working parts: inside, outside, and most important yet least noticed, the thresholds setting off one from the other. So I think it's important to focus on the border. And I've heard also before from Gabriel that he was also concerned about this border. The border is the space where we have this relationship between the interior and the outside. And here in the border, that happens, So what I believe is that there is a non-dual thresholds. That means that there is an existing border, but this border is more complex than what we led to think. So we as designers, we must not only evaluate the interior space, but must necessarily consider the reciprocal influence between interior and exterior that occurs in a transitional area. But it doesn't have to be a physical area necessarily. It can be also different from a physical. So just to give you an example, this is just a visual example, although we should be more flexible also in that. But this is a shoreline scheme. And the shoreline dynamics, of course, is very complicated. And there is a moving boundary because the shoreline is very hard to say where the boundary from the sea and the element of the earth, one is finishing and the other one is finishing as well. So there is no sharp separation between one and the other, and there is a lot of influence from one to the other. And we all know that the relationship between non-living and living organism, we said that also yesterday, people said that very clearly, that especially after the pandemic, we know very well that non-living and living organism, there is a relationship and is crucial. But the distinction is not that easy to define. How much non-humans are we? So if we study some biology, we learn that the life of a single human body is made of multiple and simultaneous and well-coordinated lives. Multicellular organisms are made of numerous single-celled organisms that are derived from combination of smaller organisms. So let's just take a really simple that everybody knows, but I guess it's interesting always to keep an eye on that in our body there is a ratio of cell and bacteria that is almost the same. So it means that there are as many bacteria as there are cells. The human body lives in a homeostatic equilibrium together with bacteria, viruses, fungi, and parasites. So another question is, how much as humans are we in power of our own actions? So I always ask myself, am I really, the driver of this machine or not? And we must be aware that all our actions are a consequence of the functioning of our human biological organism, and that all our actions are reaction to the environment we are living in and to the things we get in contact with. We are influenced by culture, by religion, by many other things. And we as designers, we have to realize how much we are driven by culture, by empathy, for example, illusion and senses. And when we see how much our mirror neurosystem works, I don't know if you know what is a mirror neurosystem, but it's a group of specialized neurons that exactly mirror the action and behavior of other people we get in contact with. And when we understand how we work, then we understand many things, like, for example, empathy. So I'm going to just show you another book that I really found interesting, and is by Antonio Damasio, a Portuguese neuroscientist, that explains in his book, Feelings and Knowing, and I'm going to read this quote: "We understand others and we can establish a communicative interaction because when we see other acting, a group of our neurons, the mirror neurosystem, is activated as if we were to perform those actions. This circuit, as if, makes the body perceive the effect of a change even if this has not happened. And this seems to be the neuropsychological basis of the ability to understand the action of others, what is defined as empathy." I don't know if you ever tried, or if you ever have the opportunity to learn a little bit about the rubber hand illusion. So it's a very interesting experiment that I would suggest everybody to do, because it's very easy, because it really makes you understand how it works. So I did it and I thought it was incredible. So I'm going to just explain it real quick. You have to sit in front of a table and put your forearms on the table. One hand has to go into a box, so to be hidden in a box. You need like a cardboard box. You put it in the box. Then you need either a rubber hand that has to be really similar to a hand, which is quite difficult to find. But I would suggest you, is what I did, is you ask a friend to come that has a hand similar to yours, so not too big, because otherwise it's not going to be easy, and to sit beside you and put the right hand close to your left hand on the table. Then you put a cloth so that you don't see that your other friend, but just the hand and the forehand on the table. And then you ask somebody else to sit in front of you, and with two brushes he has to start brushing your middle finger, your left middle finger, the real one, and the middle finger of your friend. So the brush has to go simultaneously, and they have to be, at the same time, at the same speed, for some minutes, 1 minute or two. Then you have to look at both hands, of course, and you start to think that the hands of your friend is yours. Really, it's not just a joke, it's really what it is, even though your right hand is in the box. So when the friend in front of you hits the hand of your friend, you pull out your hand from the box because you really think that he was going to hit your right hand. And this is quite interesting, I thought, because, this is how, our brain works. So I thought, wow, if this is the case, how many other things, can be fake, even though they are true. And so, of course, maybe you know this book, The Embodied Mind. And in this book, it talks a lot about this embodying and these issues. And the authors in this book state, by using the term embodied, we mean to highlight 2 points. First, that cognition depends upon the kinds of experience that come from having a body with various sensory motor capacities. And second, that these individual sensory motor capacities are themselves embedded in a more encompassing biological, psychological and cultural context. So it's not just the body, then it comes a lot of other things. And as I said previously, the designers have to realize how much we as people are driven by culture and empathy and illusion. So how our mind can be deluded, and this is interesting, of course. I've read this amazing book. This is a classical, I would say, by Merleau-Ponty, and it's the phenomenology of the perception. And according to Merleau-Ponty, the visible is interwoven with invisible, which is not simply a gap between the visible mesh. It is something more. What underlines the invisible as its ontological possibility. So an example he gives in his book is the Müller-Lyer illusion that you probably know, but I wanted to point out. This is something, again, an illusion given by our senses. So one of the lines chooses to be equal to the other without becoming unequal. It becomes other. This means that for perception, an insulated objective line and the same line taken in another figure chooses to be the same. So when we have to design an object, we have to consider that every object reveals also the invisible. By providing informations that we cannot see, but they are conveying emotions, communicating messages, and transmitting knowledge. By meaning of an object doesn't exist in itself, it exists in relation with other things and with the user. We all know, for example, when we are really attached to an object that for us has a special meaning. And we all, as user, add symbolic values to objects. Therefore, they can become not only object, but maybe also object of contemplation, like losing completely their function. And the distinction between speculative and functional, in many cases, is really blurred. I always take the example of a flower. Somebody asked me, has a function, the flower? Of course it has a function, the flower, come on. Even though you just look at the flower and you don't think there is a function, for me it has a beautiful function. It makes me smile. So when we have to define an interior space, we have to consider its function. But this has to do with the use, the occupation of the space. And then there is the identity, which has to do with the representation of the space. And then we have to consider the design of the space. And that has to do with the experience of living in the space. But all these three elements have blurred boundaries, depending on always changing factors. When we consider, for example, the use, the representation and the experience of the space, we realize that the values can vary based on social setting, cultural background, and different sensory world, and many other factors. When we talk about occupation and use, of course, everybody knows about the theory of proxemics by anthropologist Edward T. Hall. And of course, he considered how people structure the use of the space based on how people would use the space while relating with other people. And this is just an example, because everybody can maintain a different degree of personal distance depending on social settings and their cultural backgrounds. Then, of course, we have the identity. So our identity, of course, is influenced by the things we get in contact with, which they activate, for sure, emotional reaction, and everybody has different reaction, of course. This book by Bill Brown, Other Things, I'm quoting this sentence, which is really interesting, I think. Human subjects and material objects constitute one and another. So when designing an interior, we have to consider the experience also of a space, as we said. We have to think about a crucial factor also, time. So, of course, I had to bring also, one of my favorite writers, which is Borges, and The Garden of Forking Path, where he speaks a lot, about this time, how time can be different from each other, from the perspective of each other. And I'm going to read this quote, if I still have a little time, I think so. This web of time, the strands of which approach one another, bifurcate, intersect, and ignore each other through the centuries, embraces every possibility. We do not exist in most of them. In some, you exist, and I don't. Not I, sorry. While in others, I do, and you do not. And yet, in others, both of us exist. In this one, in which chance has favored me, you have come to my gate. In other, you, crossing the garden, have found me dead. In yet others, I say these very same words, but I'm in error, I'm a phantom. Time is forever dividing itself towards innumerable futures. So, design, I wanted to, conclude a little bit with some suggestions. And for us, all design, as we are all, I think most of us are designers. Design is a device for building knowledge and for, building relationship. And it's one of the most effective and form of mediations. And it is an opportunity for critical reflection. And the outcome of design are potentially vectors for change and construction of a fluid, transdisciplinary model capable of tracking increasing complex problems that you have to face, unfortunately. You more than us, I think. And if I have to give you some suggestions, it's not just too much about designing things, it's more like designing a process. And we have really to focus on the process of design. And design has to become like a transition tool, for achieving like an osmotic interaction between like culture, science, industry. And I think it's really important that we, as I said, formulate new paradigm. And this has to go through the design research, the experimentation, and we have to use new languages. I think really we need to look for new languages and also new vocabularies. That is very important. And we have also to design meaningful solutions, to produce design solutions that can stimulate reflection and acquire also narrative skills, able to transmit the story behind the design process, which is another very important skill. And then combine methods and theory from different fields, as I just tried to show you, and different knowledge to promote this cross-disciplinary research. So going back to the theme of interior ecology, we have to design, we have to design a condition of homeostasis, as I said, in the environment in which we are asked to do so. And we have to do it by exercising our capacity of creative thinking and critical thinking. I really believe so. Thank you. But if I have time, just one more thing that I wanted to read. Because I found this book that you probably know, Global Tools. I wanted to bring a book that you can really go through it if you want. And this was a project, an educational program that was happening in 1973, between 1973 and 1975 in Italy. And it was amazing. And many things that they've been studying and researching are coming back nowadays. And I thought that this was very inspiring, so I'm going to read you, hopefully I'm going to read it correctly. Ecology of the Artificial Environment by Ezio Manzini. Let us try to consider artifacts not as machines for which our first objective is complete automation and minimal handling, but as if they were plants in our garden. Try to imagine objects which are as beautiful and useful as fruit trees, objects which last and have their own lives, objects which, like a tree, are appreciated for what they are as much as what they do, objects which give a service and demand for care. Taking this path supposes a radical change in attitude from what we normally expect from a product. This implies a reversal in the relationship that develops between object and subject. In other words, a new ecological sensitivity. Taking care of objects can be a way to take care of this larger object, which is our planet. I thought it was so sweet.